If I were 20 years younger, I'd marry you. Clara Doyle. That's what Thomas Whitlock said to me. Standing in his doorway in his shirt sleeves, holding my dish of dried apple pie like it was nothing more than a Sunday favor between neighbors. He laughed when he said it. I did not laugh. I stood there on his porch with the wind pulling at the hem of my skirt and felt something in my chest crack clean in two. Because for one foolish moment, before the words finished leaving his mouth, I had let myself believe he meant it plain and true. No jest attached. I was 32 years old that spring, and in Amity Creek, that made me an old maid twice over. Everyone in town knew my story, because everyone in town had been sitting in the pews the day Elijah Marsh didn't show. I had worn my mother's wedding dress, the one with the yellowed lace at the collar, and I had stood at the front of that church for near on an hour before the preacher finally cleared his throat and told the congregation to go on home. Elijah had taken the stage to Cheyenne that same morning with a girl from the dry goods store, okay, and he never sent so much as a letter explaining why. That was 13 years gone by the time I baked that pie for Thomas Whitlock. But in a town small as ours, 13 years is nothing. Women still lowered their voices when I walked past the mercantile. Children still knew the story before they knew my Christian name. I had stopped expecting anything different from life a long while back, and I had made myself a kind of peace with it. The way a person makes peace with a bad knee or a leaking roof, you don't fix it. You just learn to live around it. My mother had taken sick that winter with a cough that wouldn't leave her chest. And Dr. Ainsley said it was consumption, though he was careful with that word. The way doctors are careful with words that frighten people. We had a little farm 3 miles outside town, wheat mostly, a few hogs. And it had been just the two of us since my father passed of a fall from the hayloft when I was 26. I did the work of 2 hands and sometimes 3, and I did it without complaint, because complaining never once put a meal on the table. Thomas Whitlock's land sat next to ours, divided only by a rail fence and a stretch of creek bottom. And he had been a widower near 2 years by then, since his wife Margaret died of the same fever that took half the babies in the county that terrible summer. He had a boy, Daniel, 7 years old, quiet as a held breath, and I used to see the two of them out working the far pasture. The boy trailing behind his father like a shadow that hadn't quite grown into itself. I started bringing pies to the Whitlock place that autumn. Not out of any grand design, only because I had seen Daniel at the schoolhouse looking thin in the face. And because a woman gets tired of cooking for herself and a sick mother and wanting, just once, to make something for a table where somebody might smile at the sight of it. Thomas always thanked me kindly. He always offered to pay, and I always refused, and it became a small ritual between us, easy as breathing. And I told myself it meant nothing more than good neighboring. I told myself that for a long while. I was good at telling myself things. It was Silas Reed who broke that easy quiet. Silas ran the general store in town, a man of decent means and cold, careful manners. And he had taken to calling on my mother more than on me, which ought to have told me something from the start. He would sit in our front room with his hat balanced on his knee and speak of interest rates and grain prices while my mother nodded along, her eyes bright with something I didn't like the look of. Dr. Ainsley's bills had climbed past what the farm could bear. And one evening after Silas had gone, my mother took my hand in hers, thin now as bird bones, and said, "Clara, that man has asked after you 3 times this month. He is not a young man's dream, I know it, but he has money enough to keep this roof over our heads and pay for whatever medicine I still need. You are not getting younger, child, and neither am I." I did not answer her that night. I went out to the porch and stood in the cold until my breath came in white clouds. And I thought about Elijah Marsh leaving me at that altar. And I thought about how a woman my age, with my history, did not get to be particular about the men who wanted her. I thought I understood exactly what my life was going to be, and I thought I had already grieved whatever else it might have been. Then came the pie, and the joke on Thomas Whitlock's porch, and the crack in my chest that told me I had been lying to myself after all. "You've gone quiet," Clara Thomas said, setting the dish down on the little table by his door. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I ought to get back before dark, that's all." "Daniel's been asking for you," he said. "He likes when you come by more than he likes when I bake, and I can't say I blame him. My biscuits could double as fence posts." He smiled at that. Easy, the way he always did, and I made myself smile back. Though it felt like lifting something heavier than it should have been, I did not come back the following week. I told myself I was busy with my mother, and that was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. Silas Reed called twice more, and the second time he brought a small parcel of ribbon for my hair. The kind of gift a man gives when he has already decided the matter is settled, and is only waiting on the woman to catch up to his thinking. My mother's cough worsened that same week, and Dr. Ainsley spoke plainer than he had before, about rest and warmth and medicines that cost more than we had. And I felt the walls of my life closing in tight around me, like the sides of a well. It was Daniel who brought me back to the Whitlock place. In the end, he came walking up our lane on a Tuesday afternoon, his coat too thin for the wind, and stood at our gate turning his cap in his hands before he found the courage to speak. "Pa's not sick or anything," he said, quick, like he'd rehearsed it. "I just wanted to know if you were still our friend. You haven't come by in a long spell, and PA's been quiet, quieter than usual. And I thought maybe I did something." Something about the boy's face, so careful and so brave in the asking, undid me faster than any grown person's words could have. I knelt down in the dirt of our lane and told him no, he hadn't done a single thing wrong, and I would come by that very Sunday with something sweet. And he grinned then like the sun coming out from behind a cloud, and I watched him run home with his coat flapping and thought, not for the first time, that there are people in this world who ask for so little and deserve so much more than they get. I did go that Sunday, and I brought a molasses cake instead of pie, for variety's sake. And Thomas met me at the fence line before I even reached the house, like he'd been watching for me a good while. "Daniel came to see you," he said. It wasn't a question. He did. I didn't send him. I didn't think you had. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, a habit I had noticed before when he was working up to something difficult. "I've been turning over what I said," he told me, "about marrying you if I were younger. I said it as a joke, Clara, because that's easier than saying a thing plain. But I've been sitting with it since, and I don't much like how it sounded coming out of my mouth. Like you were a consolation a man might settle for, given different circumstances. That wasn't what I meant, and I'm sorry if that's how it landed. How did you mean it then?" I asked, and my heart was beating harder than the question ought to have earned. He looked at me a long moment, the wind moving through the dry grass between us, and then he looked away, out toward the creek bottom, like the answer was easier to give to the land than to my face. "I meant that you are the finest thing that walks up my lane," he said, "and that I've got no business saying so, because I buried a wife not 2 years past, and because you deserve a man who isn't afraid of his own feelings. And I am exactly that kind of coward, Clara. I've been afraid since Margaret died. Afraid of wanting anything again, in case it gets taken same as she was." I did not know what to say to that. So for a moment, I said nothing at all, and the silence between us held something neither of us seemed willing to break first. "My mother wants me to marry Silas Reed," I finally told him, because it seemed only fair after what he'd given me, to give him something honest in return. He has money. My mother is sick, and the bills are more than I can carry alone. And Silas has made it plain he intends to ask, and plainer still that he expects, yes. Thomas's jaw tightened, just slightly, the only sign that the news had struck him at all. And what do you intend to say? I don't know yet, I said, and that was the truest thing. I had spoken to another living soul in longer than I could remember. The harvest social came 2 weeks later, held in the Grange Hall with lanterns strung along the rafters and a fiddle player up from Cheyenne, and the whole county seemed to have turned out for it. Farmers and their wives, the schoolteacher, Mrs. Pruitt with her sharp eyes, missing nothing, and Silas Reed in a new coat that still had the fold creases pressed into the shoulders. I had worn my good blue dress, the one I saved for occasions, and I stood near the punch table with my mother, who had insisted on coming despite her cough. Wrapped in shawls thick enough for a blizzard, Silas found me before the second dance had properly started. He took my hand without quite asking permission and led me a few steps apart from the crowd. And I could see my mother watching us with an expression that was half hope and half something closer to desperation. "Miss Doyle," he said, "formal as ever, I've spoken with your mother, and I believe she has told you my intentions. I am not a romantic man, and I won't pretend to feelings I don't hold, but I can offer you security and comfort. And I think you are sensible enough to value those things properly. Given your circumstances," he said circumstances, the way a man says a word he considers delicate. And I understood he meant my age and my history, and the whole shape of the life the town had decided for me 13 years before. "I intend to ask you formally tonight, in front of your mother and whoever else cares to witness it, so there can be no confusion about my seriousness." "Silas," I began, but he had already raised his hand, calling for quiet, and the fiddle player stopped mid-note, and every face in that Grange Hall turned toward us, and I felt the old, familiar heat of public shame climbing up my throat, the same shame I had carried out of that church 13 years gone. And I understood in that instant that whatever I said next, this town would remember it for another 13 years at least. "Clara Doyle," Silas said, loud enough for the rafters, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" I looked past him, past the ring of watching faces, past Mrs. Pruitt's eager eyes and my mother's hopeful, frightened ones, and I found Thomas Whitlock standing near the door with Daniel's hand in his. And he was not smiling, and he was not moving to stop me, because a man like Thomas would never make that choice for me, not even to save himself the grief of watching me make it wrong. "No," I said, and my voice did not shake, though my knees very nearly did. "No, Silas, I won't marry you, and I'm sorry if that shames you in front of all these people, but I'd be lying if I said yes. And I have spent enough of my life letting other people decide what I deserve. I won't spend the rest of it that way too." The hall did not go silent so much as it seemed to lean in, waiting, and my mother pressed a hand to her mouth, and Silas's face went the color of old paper, and he turned on his heel and walked out without another word. And I stood there in the middle of the floor, feeling both terrified and, for the first time and longer than I could remember, entirely like myself. It was my mother who spoke first into that ringing quiet. "Clara," she said, "what in heaven's name are we going to do about the bills?" "I don't know, Mama," I said, "but I know I couldn't have married a man for money and called it a life. Not even for you. I'm sorry." She looked at me a long moment, and something in her face softened, some old fear finally letting go of its grip. "Your father would have said the same," she murmured, "and I suppose I always knew you would too, eventually. I just didn't want to watch you go hungry, proving it." Thomas crossed the hall then, Daniel still at his side, and the whole room watched him do it. And I did not care one bit that they were watching. "Clara," he said, "I've got no store, no fortune, and a boy who eats more than any grown man I know. I can't offer you what Silas could. But I can offer you a fence line to walk along and a porch to sit on. And a man who won't ever again make a joke out of something he means with his whole chest. I should have said it plain the first time, and I'm saying it plain now. In front of God and Mrs. Pruitt and everybody else who's ever had an opinion about your life. I don't need to be 20 years younger. I just need you to say yes. Daniel looked up at me, his cap already off and clutched in both hands, hope written plain across his face. And I thought of that boy walking up our lane in his thin coat. And I thought of pies carried across a fence line. And I thought of 13 years spent believing I had already used up my share of good things. Yes, I said. And the word came out easier than any I had spoken all night. Yes, Thomas, I will. The fiddle player, bless him, took that as his cue and struck up a tune, and the hall broke into noise and motion again. And my mother was crying and laughing at once. And Daniel grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the floor like he'd been waiting his whole short life for the chance. We were married that November in the same little church where I had once stood alone for an hour in yellowed lace. And this time the groom arrived a full hour early, pacing the churchyard until Daniel told him to sit down before he wore a rut in the grass. My mother lived another 6 winters, long enough to see Daniel grow tall, and long enough to hold the daughter Thomas and I named after her. And every autumn since, without fail, I have baked a dry apple pie and carried it across that same fence line. And every year, Thomas meets me halfway, takes the dish from my hands, and says the very same words. Only now there is no laughter hiding behind them at all. If I were 20 years younger, he tells me, I'd marry you, Clara Doyle. And every year I tell him the same thing back. Good thing you didn't need to be.